Tonight, mission accomplished. The daring rescue of all 41 workers trapped in a collapsed tunnel in India. The painstaking operation to dig them out. And the painful psychological toll that may still lie ahead. Emotional reunions as more hostages are freed. And a closer look at those released from Israeli jails.
This case is precedent-setting.
Also, life in prison for a murderer motivated by misogyny. Plus, a triple viral threat, the best shot at prevention.
Everyone's sniffling away.
And a groundbreaking green flight takes off.
Nobody thought it was going to be possible ever.
The first transatlantic trip made on sustainable fuel.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight with a remarkable rescue in India and the risks of a sometimes perilous job. Canada's nearly 400,000 workers employed in the mining industry can likely relate to. Cheers erupted after a painstaking 17-day rescue mission to free 41 miners in the Himalayas. Each pulled out one by one. The dramatic ordeal started after a landslide caused a portion of the tunnel they were working on to cave in. 60 meters of rubble blocking the path between the men and the only exit out, the mouth of the tunnel. CTV's Bill Fortier on the celebrations after days of setbacks.
By late afternoon today, there were signs of a major development near the tunnel collapse that gripped India and much of the world. I am very excited, said this man. After many days of waiting, my brother is about to come out. Crowds gathered in anticipation, emergency teams in preparation. Hours later, rescue crews finally broke through using hand tools. After weeks of drilling and digging delayed by equipment breakdowns, one by one, the 41 workers crawled out to a celebration. They were given a traditional Indian welcome by local and national officials before being checked out and taken away by ambulance to a local hospital for monitoring. It was a challenging task, said the state's chief minister. While our brothers struggled inside, the entire country was struggling for them outside. The tunnel the workers were building is part of an ambitious expansion of a key highway to northern pilgrimage sites. It's a pet project of India's prime minister, but the project has been dogged by safety and environmental concerns sure to be in the spotlight in the coming days, along with questions about why the rescue took 17 days. But for now, a time to be thankful. The family of one rescued worker lit candles outside their home to celebrate the rescue. All of this is a very happy occasion, said this man. All 41 workers came out happy and safe. They'll also come out of this a little richer. The government is paying each worker 100,000 rupees for their ordeal. That's about $1,600 Canadian. And they'll each get between 2 weeks and a month off work. Omar.
All right, Bill, thank you. And joining us now from Sudbury, Ontario, is a rescue expert who is no stranger to large-scale missions, Sean Rideout, Chief Mine Rescue Officer with Ontario Mine Rescue. Sean, good to have you here. Even machines brought in by international experts were breaking down in the Indian rescue operation, and in the end, a group of so-called rat miners completed the mission. Who are they?
So it's a group of individuals that do a very primitive method of mining. They don't use any advanced machinery. They're using their hands and very basic tools. But they also don't have some basic safety features that us Canadians use all the time, such as ground support, personal protective equipment. So this type of mining has been banned in India for more than 10 years and is also banned in Canada and North America.
For the freed men, obviously a lot of jubilation today, but their ordeal may not be over. What's next for them?
They have a long path of recovery ahead of them. You can imagine these people have been trapped underground for 4, 5, 6 days without knowing if anybody was coming to get them. So you can imagine the tolls that takes on somebody's psychological and mental aptitude, in the weeks coming. So they may be getting 2 weeks or a month off of work, but they'll be using that time to rest and recover from the ordeal that they just recovered from.
A tough road ahead, but at least they are out tonight. Sean Rideout, thank you so much for this. A shocking mining accident has killed 11 people and injured 75 in South Africa. An elevator plummeted 200 meters while it was carrying workers to the surface of a platinum mine yesterday. South Africa is the world's largest producer of the metal and was on track to reduce mining-related fatalities before this incident. The operator has launched an investigation. The extended truce between Israel and Hamas is set to expire in a matter of hours after one last exchange tomorrow. CTV's Heather Wright on the dozen hostages released today.
As crowds whistle and cheer, the fifth group of hostages was freed by Hamas today. The terror group releasing this video showing 10 Israelis and 2 Thai nationals as they were handed over to the Red Cross, part of the extended truce, which also saw 30 Palestinians released from Israeli jails. 15 women and 15 children celebrated as they arrived in the occupied West Bank. This joy is filled with pain and sacrifice, she says. Another exchange is expected to take place tomorrow, but there are fears for the hostages who remain in Gaza. Dozens are held by other militant groups, including the youngest, 10-month-old Kafir. He was kidnapped along with his 4-year-old brother Ariel and parents Yarden and Shiri Bibas.
There is citizens, not prisoners, citizens, kids, children, babies that didn't do anything.
Families want more to be done to secure their release before any fighting resumes. At the United Nations today, the Palestinian envoy called for this truce to turn into a permanent ceasefire.
No conflict in recent memory has seen so many children killed at this pace.
In Gaza, the pause has allowed life to resume, even if there's little left of the homes they once lived in. As much as you try to retrieve things, it's useless, this man says. We need machinery and tools. We have hopes, but we can't do anything. Today, the UN was able to deliver more aid to people in northern Gaza, where many are still living in hospitals and schools. More than 1 million Gazans are displaced, leading to increasing concern about the spread of disease.
Eventually, we will see more people dying from disease than we're even seeing from the bombardment.
This truce, already extended by 2 days, is set to expire tomorrow, though Qatar has said negotiations for another extension are ongoing. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. The truce has also allowed time for some stark assessments inside Gaza. In the city of Khan Yunis, an analysis of satellite images shows damage to 15% of buildings, while in northern Gaza, half the buildings are partly or completely destroyed. The bombing campaign began after the Hamas attacks where young children were taken hostage. But there are also questions about how many young Palestinians have ended up inside Israeli jails. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver has that story.
Over the past week, 180 Palestinian women and children have been released from Israeli prisons, with some receiving a hero's welcome, despite an Israeli ban on such celebrations. Our freedom is not complete, except by liberating the last prisoner. Our feeling of joy is clouded by sadness, this woman says. Israel says many of the Palestinians being released are affiliated with groups like Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Israel also says they have been imprisoned for crimes ranging from attempted murder to assault and throwing stones. Fatima Shaheen was released this week, about 7 months after being arrested and accused of attempted murder. They accused me of carrying out a stabbing. It's not true, she said.
It is higher than it has ever been.
Amnesty International says many Palestinians have been detained without cause and held without charge or due process for months, and in some cases years, in what's called administrative detention.
And if you're detained, you actually do not know why you're detained, and your lawyer does not know either. So it's virtually impossible for you to be able to challenge that.
Israel says administrative detention is a preventative and necessary security measure, and that all prisoners in its custody are held according to the law. But a recent Save the Children report says that while in detention, 86% of Palestinian children reported physical and emotional abuse, including being beaten, 70% being threatened with harm, and 60% reported being held in solitary confinement.
Children have special considerations, and they have rights as outlined, again, in international law. And the systems and the processes that they are subject to are not in accordance with with international law.
The Embassy of Israel in Ottawa says it's Hamas who kidnapped babies and toddlers, adding that the transferred Palestinians were involved in what it describes, Omar, as acts of terror.
All right, Annie, thank you. A landmark legal case to tell you about tonight involving a man who pleaded guilty to the murder of a Toronto massage parlor employee. Today, he was sentenced to life in prison. It's the first time gender-based violence in Canada has been labeled terrorism. CTV's Adrian Gabriel on the implications.
A blood-stained door handle marks the entrance to the scene of a chilling murder that has now led to a precedent-setting ruling by a Canadian court. February 2020, a then 17-year-old wielding a machete walked into this Toronto spa, murdering 24-year-old Ashley Noel Arzaga and injuring another woman. The killer, whose identity is protected under the Young Offenders Act, pleaded guilty to first-degree and attempted murder, though a Canadian judge has ruled that the murderous attack was also an act of terrorism, linked to an online subculture predominantly made up of men who blame women for their lack of sexual relations, known as incels.
It's done under the cloak of the internet.
During sentencing today, Justice Sukail Akhtar said the attack reflects the evils of the incel ideology, going on to say he didn't just murder Miss Arzaga, he butchered her with a 17-inch sword. This is the first time an incel-motivated terrorist attack has led to a first-degree murder conviction in a Canadian court.
Every time a finding of terrorism in relation to homicide sheds a little more light on a developing social problem, which is the radicalization online of predominantly young people.
The machete was this big.
Her identity now protected by the courts on the day of the attack, CTV News spoke to the lone survivor who fought off the killer. She claims she used his own machete against him.
I fought hard. I took the machete from him. I put the machete through his back.
A clear indicator in this case was a sexist phrase found inscribed on the murder weapon, and a note promoting an ideology of violence against women discovered in the teenager's pocket.
The convicted killer has been sentenced to life in prison, though he'll be eligible to apply for parole in just 10 years because he was still a minor when he carried out the vicious murder. Omar.
Adrian Gabriel in Toronto tonight. Well, switching gears, flu season hasn't officially begun yet, but if you're not sick, you may know someone else who is. Canada is bracing for a triple threat of viruses this winter. Cases of influenza, RSV, and COVID-19 are on the rise. CTV's Alison Bamford explains where in the country it's the worst.
This time of year, it's often not a question of if or when you'll get sick, but rather which virus you'll catch.
Flu and RSV are still forces to contend with, and we know our healthcare system is already stretched to begin with, so you add COVID on top of that, it just makes things more difficult.
The latest federal data shows RSV and influenza A cases increasing across the country, with more than 1,800 cases of the flu recorded between November 12th and 18th. Alberta and Saskatchewan seeing the worst of it while also dealing with steady COVID cases.
In the past 2 weeks, we already almost match what we were seeing at the height of the cases at the height of flu season last year.
Flu test positivity across the prairies is nearly 17%, 10% higher than the national average. Of Canada's 11 flu-related deaths recorded since the end of August, 5 happened in Saskatchewan in the first 2 weeks of November.
Our vaccine uptake is not very high. It needs to be higher, particularly for flu, but also for COVID.
Down east, doctors say the flu hasn't taken over quite yet. Right now, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada are seeing higher COVID positivity rates than those in the West, with Ontario's COVID wastewater level at its highest in more than a year.
The hospitals are packed with people with COVID. They're really struggling in terms of beds.
COVID isn't expected to pack a punch like it did in the peak years of the pandemic, but medical experts say that's no reason to let your guard down. Masking, hand washing, staying home when sick, and most importantly, vaccinations will go a long way in fighting off viruses and alleviating pressure on the healthcare system. Alison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
Coming up.
If we didn't prove it could be done, you would never ever get sustainable aviation fuel.
Powering a potential flight path for sustainable travel. Plus,
Ça fait 2 mois que tu craches dans mon sous-sol.
Remembering Quebec singer Karl Tremblay.
Tu chill en camisole. Pogne tes guenilles, trouve-toi un appart. J'suis même prêt à endosser le bac.
Panama's president has directed a Canadian-owned copper mine to shut down after the country's Supreme Court ruled that the contract for the mine is unconstitutional. The ruling was celebrated by crowds of demonstrators who argue the open-pit mine is damaging coastal areas and threatening water supplies. Vancouver's First Quantum Minerals says it has suspended commercial production at the mine. Environmental concerns have fueled a path to greener air travel, and today, a Virgin Atlantic jet completed the first transatlantic flight using 100% sustainable fuels. The aviation industry says it's a major step to lowering emissions. But as CTV's Kevin Gallagher reports, environmentalists are not convinced.
The fuel powering this commercial jet into the air is made from a mix of wasted fats and plant sugars.
Nobody thought it was going to be possible ever for long-haul airlines to be able to fly on sustainable aviation fuel.
The London to New York trip is the first transatlantic flight not to use any fossil fuels, with the goal to inspire more biofuels in the industry before the upcoming global climate summit in Dubai.
There's only 0.1% of the world's aviation fuel is manufactured in a sustainable way.
In 2018, Qantas Airlines made the first trans-Pacific flight with 10% of the fuel derived from mustard seeds, produced by a Canadian company, a blend Canada and other countries want as the standard by 2030.
We know how to decarbonize. The sustainable aviation fuels are going to play a huge role in doing so and helping us achieve the net zero targets that we've put in place as an industry.
Airline travel accounts for more than 2% of global carbon emissions. The industry says sustainable fuels will help it reduce emissions by up to 70%, though it costs about 3 to 5 times more than regular jet fuel. Concerns about price are expected to reduce once production scales up, according to advocates.
We think there is enough different types of feedstocks here in Canada. It's actually a competitive advantage.
Though Greenpeace and other environmental organizations are concerned ramping up biofuel production will only increase deforestation and food scarcity, insisting there may be better technology in the future. But for now, the only way to cut jet emissions is to fly less. Kevin Gallagher, CTV News, Ottawa.
Still ahead.
My mother, Rosalind Carter, was the most beautiful woman I've ever met.
Presidents past and present bid farewell to a First Lady. Well, nothing quite prepared police in Ann Arbor, Michigan to deal with this slow-speed chase.
Pull over. Pull over now.
Police were in pursuit of this stolen forklift. Turns out a 12-year-old boy led them on a joyride for more than an hour. The child eventually gave up after parking the machine and was taken to a juvenile detention center. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter was honored at a memorial service in Georgia today. Family and friends paid tribute. The Bidens, Clintons, and past First Ladies Michelle Obama and Melania Trump were all in attendance. as was Rosalind Carter's husband, former President Jimmy Carter, too frail to read a letter their daughter read instead on his behalf.
My darling, every time I have ever been away from you, I have been thrilled when I returned.
Rosalind Carter was a trailblazer, political partner, but to her family, above all, a devoted mother and grandmother.
We all got cards from her on our birthdays, $20 bill in it.
After the break. An outpouring of love for a Quebec icon.
Non, j'aime pas ça, savoir que tu tiens avec la broche. Hey, tout le monde, on veut vous entendre. Mets ta tête sur mon épaule.
A beloved Canadian musician was remembered today, but one not well known in English Canada, showing the two solitudes can still remain when it comes to music and culture. Karl Tremblay was described by some as Quebec's Gord Downie. He died earlier this month after a battle with prostate cancer. CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin on the massive tribute.
Dis-toi que ce soir, ma blonde.
The Cowboy Fringants took to the stage, this time, though, without their lead singer, Karl Tremblay. Among his bandmates, his life partner, mother of his two children, Marianne Clépine. What we fear most when we lose someone is that we will forget their voice, she says. I believe we will hear Karl's for a very long time. Through his words, Tremblay tuned in to the aspirations and disappointments of Quebecers.
He keeps saying it's a soundtrack to my life.
Through his songs, he was a friend at parties. He was a friend in moments of sadness, he says. So we've come here tonight to say goodbye to a friend. Tremblay and Les Cowboy Fringants gave voice to a generation of Quebecers, album after album, creating songs that mixed politics, humor, nostalgia over nearly a quarter of a century. Fans say Tremblay's charisma shined on stage, the spotlight highlighting his self-deprecating humor. He got crowds to dance, but also to cry. Tremblay announced he was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2022, but he continued to tour. A too short story he sang on the plains of Abraham in Quebec City last summer in front of 90,000 fans. That on a night when it was clear Tremblay was increasingly showing exhaustion. He died on November 15th. Spontaneous vigils were held in several parts of the province. Mon cher Karl. Politicians expressed their sadness, and the sports world too mourned. 14,000 people snatched up tickets for tonight's tribute in 10 minutes, and many more watched on giant screens, uniting Quebecers in death as he did, said the Premier, in life.
Because of him, we were able in many shows to be all together.
Together paying tribute to an extraordinary, ordinary Quebecer. Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
A remarkable artist. And that's a snapshot of this Tuesday. Thank you for watching. For all of us at CTV National News, good night.